Hello friends, a very warm welcome to Ansarkari and I am Vikas Bhardwaj. We have seen in our previous lectures that there is a kind of ongoing theme behind all the lectures that we have covered in World History till now. I would request you to flip through the pages back and try to understand that beginning from Renaissance, going through industrialization and even French and American Revolution, and then understanding Italian and even German unification along with what was happening in West Asia and also in Africa, and going till understanding of the First World War. All this involves a kind of a theme which is very much linked with not only ethics but also linked with international relations. That is why this series is very important for candidates having history optional, political science and international relations optional, and even those who are having public administration and even some aspects of anthropology and sociology. Very important. And obviously, without saying, it is a very important part of General Studies Paper 1 too. So again, going with the theme and also clarity and objectivity, which is hallmark of our all programs because they have been done with a clear cut understanding and you in the center. You are going to write answers, you're going to submit it to me, and also we are going to discuss how you are going to revise. When we see that First World War is taking place, two important, very great events which are there is the League of Nations and Russia and other revolutions which are taking place. Basically, Russian Revolution is actually a big change over the world, but within Russian Revolution there are other kind of changes also. So when we see the League of Nations first, let's try to understand. So after First World War, there was a strong demand for some sort of international platform to be set up for preserving world peace because these world powers in Europe, they were able to understand, including America, that we are going to be as selfish as we are for always time to come. So let's try to be showing a good face and try to create a kind of a body which will help us to become little less greedy, if I say in informal terms. So 14 points drafted in 1918 which sought the establishment of the League of Nations, and it was setting up by 1920, headquartered at Geneva, and the document having objectives and constitution were laid down known as the Covenant. And the primary aim of the League were as follows, that is to generate international cooperation, achieve international peace and security by avoiding armed conflict, which was obviously not possible because Second World War was coming up, and to settle all disputes by peaceful means and to honor international rules of law. And today also you can see that that is not being done by even developed countries. And such a conduct that if any nation is violating these principles, economic sanctions could be brought against it. And this tool is also being used today. So you can say that whether who is right or wrong, that is our understanding. And the last resort will be military pressure. So you see, today's world, whatever are the bodies there, including United Nations and other international bodies, they are having their root, they are having their genesis in the post First World War. The League of Nations functioned through, one can say, following organs: the General Assembly, which consisted of three representatives, that they were the maximum number of each of the members of the league, which were having one vote each. And it elected temporary members of the council which controlled budget. It admitted new members also and elected with the council, and there were going to be the judges of the International Court of Justice also. And this council of judges, which was composed of 4 permanent members, 4 non-permanent members, which were having a 3-year tenure. And then P4, like the way we have P5 in context of United Nations, you have P4, that is Britain, France, Italy and Japan. You can think of where is US, you can think of where is Germany. That is how the scenario was. The council's important resolution had to be unanimously approved by all its members in order to become effective. Non-permanent members were elected by the General Assembly for a year, you can say for a term of 3 years. So by 1926 the council had 13 members, and the seat for non-permanent members was now increased to 9. So you can see the blueprint for United Nations was to be seen in the League of Nations. And as I already said, the secretariat was at Geneva. The League also had a permanent court of international justice, as I just said, and it was headquarters in The Hague. The, the court was set up to interpret international treaties, to give its verdicts on the cases of international disputes, and the decisions of the court were binding. Remember this, please note down, to both the parties involved in the dispute. Similarly, the decisions in the Council had to be unanimous, and the mandate of the League of Nations Security Council was to deal with political issues. So, only thing which you have to understand is that if you are able to relate what is happening in the international affairs in these times, then you can see the League of Nations is actually showcasing the blueprint for United Nations. But then in between, there is going to be another catastrophe in terms of Second World War. So success of the League of Nations, let's see. Initially it was a success because everybody will be very high on principles, very high on idealism. It secured the withdrawal of Serbian troops from Albania. It resolved a quarrel between Italy and Greece over Corfu. It settled the Swedish-Finnish quarrel over Åland Islands. In the economic sphere, it assumed responsibility for the financial solvency of Austria-Hungary. It supervised the settlement of a menial Greek refugees from Asia Minor and Eastern Thrace in Greece. But irony is, where is Asia? Irony is, where is India? Irony is, where is freedom struggle of colonies against colonial powers in Africa? So again, you can say the League of Nations is actually Eurocentric. That is what critically one can understand. And the first decade of League closed with the United Kellogg-Briand Pact 1928, by which the parties to the pact bond themselves to avoid war. Very important, Kellogg-Briand Pact. So although it failed to provide the model for the UN, it strengthened the spirit of international cooperation, as I just said. Let's start and understand the organizational structure of the League of Nations. Membership, 42 member nations. 1926, when Germany was granted membership, the total number of membership it reached 55. Kellogg Brand Pact, as I just said, US Secretary of State Frank Kellogg, Aristide Brand, French Foreign Minister, and the 55 nations they went on to sign renounces aggressive war. Signers agreed not to use war as a tool of foreign policy, and self-defense military use is okay, but how you will define self-defense, that is the big part. The legal basis for international crimes against peace. That is how the key aspect of the Nuremberg trials after the Second World War, the root, you can say, the genesis goes here. So the success of the League of Nations is to be linked because there were economic and social works to be done through its commissions and committees. For example, ILO was most successful, fixing minimum number of days, minimum wages, ensuring member nations providing unemployment benefits or old age pensions. It included information dissemination with respect to performance of different member nations and pushed the governments for action in the area of welfare of workers. But again, here I would like to state that these are going to be the values, these are going to be the principles for developed nations or so-called Europe and America. But what about the countries like India? How you can apply these values of ILO to colonies, because colonies are already reeling under the illegal, I should say, and also illegitimate rule of the colonial powers. Refugee organization helped prisoners of war in Russia to their homes outside Russia. It helped Jews who were fleeing to escape Nazi persecution to resettle in different countries where they would be safe. Health organization, it did good work in finding causes of different epidemics, especially successful in combating typhus epidemic in Russia, which had the potential to spread to rest of Europe. So again, Eurocentric point. Responsibility of monitoring the governance of territories given the member nations as mandates. So the term mandate means the former colonies of Ottoman Empire in Germany, they were actually divided among the great powers. A separate commission set up for supervising the governance in SAR, that is the region, was very efficient and successful. A plebiscite was held there in 1935. After the plebiscite, SAR region was returned back to Germany, as we have already seen in case of German unification. So mandate commission, it was functioning well, but it can be argued that it did not do much against colonialism in the favor of former African colonies, and they were converted into mandates and they were to be prepared for independence. But the commission is failing itself to ensure that colonial powers are providing for positive steps so that colonies get freedom. So local governments in mandates, for example, in that case in India also, this will be strongly discouraged by the colonial powers. That is how in 1930s League suffered a series of losses when it came to solve the dispute with respect to interest of the great powers. Again, remember, great powers, everything is being said from the perspective of great powers. It is inhumane, it is unjustified, and it is not going to be sustainable, as the Second World War will see. So it failed to contain aggression of Japan in Manchuria, Italy in Abyssinia, and Albania. Similarly, it failed to properly handle the problem of Spanish Civil War between 1936 and 39 and was helpless in the face of Hitler's aggression in Austria, Czechoslovakia, Memel, Poland in 1938-39. One by one, great powers of Europe defied the League and gave up their membership. Japan and Germany left the League in 1933 and Italy left the League in 1937. Very important, you must remember these dates, you must remember the sequence, then only you will be able to write a wonderful and a beautiful answer. This is on the demand of the question, and mind it, India is reeling under colonial rule of the British at the same time. So the League of Nations failed due to multiplicity of factors. It was not universal in its membership. Not all the members were prepared to shoulder the obligations imposed by the League, and League itself had no military or administrative power to enforce its will upon the recalcitrant states. Autocratic states like Germany and Italy, they were not accustomed to the habit of parliamentary compromise, because authoritarian rule or the rule of you can say dictatorship was actually prevalent over there. They were not believing in the idea of authority of the majority vote rule, like the way we say in case of democracy. So when we see the question that can be asked, please write down these questions and you will try to answer them, and we will check them in our in-person interactions. That League of Nations sought to achieve the profoundest of all the psychological revolutions. Profoundest, very important. Manchurian crisis with respect to Japan, and you can Google it also a bit to get some more facts. Communist International and the League of Nations both announced the end of balance of power. Very important question. And in the long run, Locarno Treaty, December 1925, was destructive of the both Treaty of Versailles and Treaty of Covenant. We have not discussed Locarno Treaty, that we will do separately. League of Nations is League of Notions, very important. And the effectiveness of the League of Nations to prevent and check the Japanese aggression against China was the first serious blow to the prestige as an agency for providing security that you have to critically examine. Now let's see Russia and the revolutions. Very important, because Russian revolution is going through phases. That is why timeline we have to see. Remember this timeline, write it down in a note, put it down on the paper, and then paste it on the table, or whatever way you want, but you have to remember so that you can write and effectively bring to the answers. 1900, Tsar Nicholas II rules over Russian Empire with absolute power. 1904, Russia suffers humiliating defeat in the Russo-Japanese War against Japan, which led to protest and call for reform. 1905, after Bloody Sunday, Nicholas II agrees to allow a Duma, that is a representative body. 1914, Russia entered World War I, quickly suffered huge losses and a major defeat to Germany. March 1917, February Revolution, revolt in Petrograd, and it is forcing the Tsar to abdicate, and a provisional, you can say, republic was established. And November 1917, October Revolution, Bolsheviks take control in Petrograd and overthrow the republic. So the Russian Revolution, which is very important to be seen from 1917 to 1921, it was a period of not only change in Russia, but it was going to impact the whole world. It was a period of political and social revolution across Russian Empire. We are saying so because we will understand very soon why we are calling it a period of political and social revolution. Was it a planned social revolution? Was political activities which were taking place in a certain manner, or it was a chaos? So it was beginning with the abolition of monarchy in 1917 and concluding in 1923 with Bolshevik establishment of the Soviet Union. Please write the spelling of Bolshevik and Soviet Union at the end of Civil War. And in the early 20th century, that ultimately resulted in the overthrow of Tsar Nicholas II. Establishment of communist government was there. This dramatically changed Russia from an autocracy to communist system of government. Okay, communist. Very important. The first great experiment in the world. The Russian Revolution was a huge success in economic, social, and political change, because it is going to try to divide resources equally among all sections of society, especially the proletariats, that is, workers and peasants. So the number of different factors that built up over time, including economic, military, and political circumstances, will be helping Russia, or you can say the USSR, to spread its wings up to a very, very large area. And this ideology will be in constant comparison and constant, you can say, fight, or you can say constant antagonism with respect to capitalism. So unrest and criticism of the government, it reached the climax in 1905 with the Russian defeat in the war against Japan in 1904-05, as I just told you. There was a general strike, attempted revolution, which forced Nicholas to make concessions, because he was knowing that now there cannot be any peace. That is why it is called October Manifesto. These included the granting of an elected parliament, Duma, as I already said, and it became clear that Duma was ineffective. The unrest increased and culminated into the disastrous Russian defeats in the First World War and into the two revolutions, both in 1917. Why? The first revolution is in February March, that is overthrowing Tsar and set up a moderate provisional government. When it was also not able to do anything and wanted to change the face, it was again itself overthrown by a second uprising, that is called the Bolshevik Revolution of October-November. Please do check up and Google side by side that the Gregorian calendar and Russian calendar, both the dates are different, so you have to see from one date perspective. So the new Bolshevik government, which was shaky at first, and its opponent known as Whites, tried to destroy it, causing a bitter civil war between 1918 to 1920. But Lenin and Trotsky, they were the leaders of the Bolsheviks, the Reds, who won the civil war, now calling themselves communists. They were able to consolidate their power, and Lenin began the task of leading Russia to recovery, but he died prematurely in January 1924. So you can say the Russian Revolution of 1905 and October Manifesto and the fundamental laws of 1906, the things were moving on. Political parties were illegal before 1914. Russian Socialist Democratic Workers' Party or Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party was founded in 1898 by socialists who respected Marx ideas. We can see the Marx ideas when you check up and go to the sociology series. There we have done a whole lot of very important and detailed discussions on Karl Marx and his ideology. So in 1903, this party was divided into two groups. One is Mensheviks, other is Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks, who were in majority, they were led by Lenin, who is regarded as the greatest thinker in socialism after Marx. So what is happening? Were the revolutions of 1917 inevitable? That is what we are saying. So Nicholas II is trying to stabilize the regime. But then he is surviving 1905 revolution because his opponents were not united. There was no central leadership because the whole thing had flared spontaneously in a chaos. Most of the army was remaining loyal. He had been willing to compromise at the critical moment by issuing the October Manifesto, as I just said. He was also looking for giving concessions. He was also allowing an elected parliament called Duma. He was also granting basic liberties to the population, freedom of conscience, of speech, assembly, association, universal suffrage, and elections for the Duma. No law could begin to operate without the approval of Duma. So all these ideas actually they went on to postpone Great Revolution, and that is why Nicholas II was happy. He had an excellent opportunity to make constitutional monarchy work and throw himself on the side of moderate reformers. Okay, he's not too much, one can say, radical. However, there were other demands not addressed in the manifesto: improvement of industrial working conditions and pay, cancellation of redemption of payment of these annual payment to the government by peasants in return for their freedom, and some land. Following the abolition of serfdom in 1861, one can say, although peasants had received their legal freedom, these compulsory payments had reduced half of the rural population in dire poverty. Very, very important point. Very important point. Everywhere it is actually the peasants, everywhere it is workers who are the one who are actually toiling. So abolition of serfdom is only in name. Okay, their legal freedom is there, but the compulsory payment is still making them die every moment. And he also cleared for amnesty for political prisoners. That means political prisoners will be released. But then how you can say that on the ground level, all these things will be actually implemented very fairly? It was not the case. That is why the first Duma 1906, one can say, was not democratically elected, although all classes were allowed to vote. System was rigged so that landowners and middle class would be in the majority. And one can say a genuine democratic electoral system and the right to strike, abolition of death penalty, all these things were actually, they were not be what I can say implemented effectively. This was too drastic, too far drastic for Nicholas, who had the Duma dispersed by troops only after 10 weeks. Second Duma suffered the same fate because he changed the voting system, depriving peasants and urban workers of the vote. Third Duma, 1907 to 1912, and the fourth Duma were much more conservative and therefore lasted longer. Therefore, on occasion, they criticized the government. They had no power because the Tsar controlled the ministers and the secret police. ये सब पढ़कर ऐसा लगता है जैसे प्रीलिम्स का एग्जाम है. Every time a person is trying, scoring better, then writing wins, then again writing wins, then again writing wins, and finally getting success. Same is the case with Russian Revolution. जब ड्यूमा एक बार में नहीं बन सकती जैसी चाहिए, तो अगर बिना तैयारी के, बिना टेम्परमेंट के, बिना एटीट्यूड के आप एक बार में सारा एग्जाम निकालने की बात कैसे सोच सकते हैं? इसीलिए हमें हिम्मत के साथ काम करना होगा. So the weaknesses of the regime, that is the failure of land reforms, industrial unrest, industrial strikes set up by shooting of 270, striking gold miners in Lena goldfields in Serbia. Very, very important. In not Serbia, I should say Siberia, please correct. So government repression, that is the secret police, which is rooting out revolutionaries among the university students, lecturers, deported masses of Jews, thereby ensuring that both groups were firmly anti-Tsarists. And the situation was very dangerous because the government had made the mistake of alienating three of the most important sections of society against it. One is peasants, industrial workers, and third is intelligentsia. So revival of the revolutionary parties, that is Lenin and the Bolsheviks, the Mensheviks and the social revolutionaries were another revolutionary party, one can say. And the royal family is finally discredited. So one hand you can say monarchy is trying, on the other hand you can say the general revival of revolutionary thoughts is always taking place, then they are not crushed up completely. So war failures, especially the First World War, it made that there is going to be revolution. Historians agree that Russian failures in the war made revolution certain because the troops and police were also ready for mutiny. So there was nobody left to defend autocracy. The war revealed incompetent and corrupt organization, shortage of equipment, poor transport organization. Distribution was also very, very hazy and also not very efficient. Arms and ammunitions were very slow to reach the front. There were plenty of food in the country, but they were not reaching in different parts of cities and also in villages because most of the trains were monopolized by the military, and the bread was the most scarce and most expensive commodity. So Norman Stone has shown that Russian army equipped itself reasonably well, and Brusilov's 1916 offensive was an impressive success, but Nicholas made the fatal mistake of appointing himself as supreme commander in August 1915. His tactical blunders threw all the advantages won by Brusilov's offensive and drew on himself the blame for later defeats and for the high death rate. So we can say by January 1917, most groups in society were disillusioned with the incompetent way of the Tsar and running of the war. The autocracy, Duma, industrialists, and the army, they were beginning to turn against Nicholas, and the feeling that it would be better to sacrifice him to avoid a much worse revolution that might sweep away the whole social structure. General Karimov told a secret meeting of Duma members at the end of 1916 that we would welcome the news of a coup d'etat. Revolution is imminent, and we can feel it so. If you decide on such extreme step, we will support you. Clearly, there is no other way. So you can say nothing is happening in vacuum. The two revolutions, that is February and another revolution that is of March and October 1917, is very important to understand because the revolutions are known in Russia as the February and October revolutions because the Russians were still using old Julian calendar, which was 13 days behind Gregorian calendar used by the rest of the Europe. Russia adopted Gregorian calendar in 1918. So the events with the Russia known as February Revolution, it began on 23 February 1917, which was 8 March outside Russia. So according to Gregorian calendar, it is 8 March. When Bolsheviks took power on 25 November, 25 October, that is also Julian, it was 7th November, outside, according to Gregorian calendar. So the Julian calendar is used for internal events, and one can say that is in Russia, and the Gregorian calendar for international events such as First World War until 1st February 1918. So we are using both the dates for Russian, changes and events. We are using Julian calendar, and for rest of the world we are using Gregorian calendar. So the first revolution began on 23 February, that is a Julian calendar, when the bread riots break out in Petrograd, that is St. Petersburg, and rioters were joined by thousands of strikers from the nearby armament factory. Tsar is going to send troops, he is going to force them and to crush them, and the 40 people will be killed. Mobs will be seizing public buildings, release prisoners from jail, and police will be not able to do anything, and arsenals will be taken over by the mobs. The Duma advised Nicholas to set up constitutional monarchy, but he refused, and he sent up more troops to Petrograd to try restore order. This convinced Duma and the generals that Nicholas, who was on a way back to Petrograd, would have to go. And some of his senior generals told Nicholas that only way to save monarchy for him was to renounce the throne. Unfortunately, Norwood had made sure that Michael would accept the throne. So when he refused, Russian monarchy came to an end. So you can see February Revolution led to the end of Russian monarchy forever. A great event is going to take place. The civil war plot by socialist martyrs. That is how one can say. So you see the kind of images, kind of cartoons and everything what was happening in Europe in 1915. Europe was in chaos. Russian expansion in Asia, you can say how it was happening in the 15th and 16th centuries, and then what is happening till 1900, till Alexander III. All this map is trying to show you. Please have a look for at least 1 minute or so and try to understand because you can get question in the prelims also. So was it a revolution from above or below or organized or spontaneous? This has been the subject of some controversy among the historians. George Katkov thought that the conspiracy among the elite was a decisive factor. Nobles, Duma members and generals forced Nicholas to abdicate in order to prevent a real mass revolution developing. Whereas W.H. Chamberlain, he wrote that it was one of the most leaderless, spontaneous, anonymous revolution of all times. Revolution from the below by the masses was decisive. It threw the elite into panic. Without the crowd on streets, there would have been no need for the elite to act. None of the traditional liberal historians thought revolutionary parties had a great role to play in this event. Soviet historians agreed with Chamberlain that it was a revolution from below because they did not accept that it was spontaneous. On the contrary, they were actually saying the Bolsheviks had played a vital role in organizing strikes and demonstrations. These strikes and demonstrations were the key, and many Western historians they have supported the theory of mass uprising organized from below, but not the necessary one organized by the Bolsheviks, because the Western historians are also having their own vision or their own vested interest because they do not want to show capitalism in poor light. So the provisional government which is to be formed at this time was also a very short-term thing because the most people expected autocracy of Tsarist system to be replaced by democratic system or democratic republic with an elected parliament. Duma set up mainly a liberal provisional government. with Prince George Lvov as Prime Minister. He was replaced by Alexander Kerensky, a moderate socialist. But the new government was just as perplexed by the enormous problems it was facing, like the Tsar. On night of 25th October, a second revolution took place, which overthrew provisional government and brought back Bolsheviks to the power. Lenin and Trotsky, they both were actually behind this revolution, and after years of disagreement, they were able to work together. However, Mensheviks and the socialist revolutionaries, they still believed that this revolution should have been delayed until industrial workers were more numerous. That is why they left and they walked out of the Second Congress of Soviets, leaving Lenin and Bolsheviks to set up new Soviet government with himself in charge. It was to be called the Council of People's Commissars, or you can say Soyaprom for short. Why did the provisional government fall from power so soon? It took unpopular decision to continue the war. But the June offensive, that is Kerensky's idea, was another disaster failure. It caused the collapse of army moral, discipline, and thousands of troops deserted and they came back home. Government had to share power with Petrograd Soviet, very important key term, an elected committee of soldiers and workers representative which tried to govern the city, because these Soviets will be there throughout USSR when we see about the communist rule. The government lost support because it delayed elections which it promised, and for a constituent assembly arguing they were not possible in the middle of a war when several million troops were away for fighting. So Lenin was able to return from exile in Switzerland, and Germans allowed him to travel through Petrograd in a special sealed train in the hope that he would cause, you can say, a kind of a support for the Germans. There was increasing economic chaos with inflation, rising bread and lagging wages, and shortages of raw material and fuel. Industry was severely handicapped by the shortage of investment. Government lost popularity because of the July days, or you can say on 3rd July, there was a huge demonstration of workers and soldiers who marched on the Taurid Palace, where both the provisional government and the Petrograd Soviet were meeting. Kornilov affair, very important again. It is a kind of a event, embarrassed the government and increased popularity of Bolsheviks, because in the mid-October, urged on by Lenin, Petrograd Soviet took the crucial decision to attempt to seize power, and on October 25-26, Bolshevik, that is Red Guards troops, they were loyal to Petrograd Soviet, took over important buildings including telegraph offices, railway stations surrounding the Winter Palace, and the provisional government ministers were arrested except Kerensky because he managed to escape. It was a bloodless coup, enabling Lenin to announce that provisional government had been overthrown. So you can say that all these events were taking up in a kind of a very, I should say, general and organic way, and some things were planned and something were not planned. Similarly, successfully, if we say that Lenin was able to bring Bolsheviks into picture and was able to create a big goal, that is what we have to see. Because once Lenin and Bolsheviks are in power, were they able to solve all the problems of Russia between 1917 to 24? Because there was lack of majority support. That is why to be in the power, they need other groups, other people, and also they need to allow free elections. So one of the Lenin's first decrees was to nationalize all land, including former crown states and the land belonging to church, without compensation, so that it could be redistributed among the peasants, so that he could win their support. Government claimed the right to close down hostile newspapers and journals and set up a new security police force. You can see the new communist power, what is going to do. They had the mind-blowing name, the Extraordinary Commission for Combating Sabotage and the Counter-Revolution, usually known as Cheka, and its leader was Felix Dzerzhinsky. Under a genuine democratic system, that is social revolutionaries who had an overall majority would have formed government under their leader Viktor Chernov. But the Lenin was determined that Bolsheviks were going to stay in power, so that is why he is going to create his own mechanizations. But the next pressing problem was how to withdraw from the war, because armistice between Russia and the Central Power had been agreed in December 1917, but long negotiations followed during the which Trotsky tried to persuade Germans to moderate their demands was unsuccessful, and the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, very important, was cruel because Russia lost Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Georgia, and Finland, and it included a third of Russia's farming land, a third of our population, two-thirds of our coal mines, and half our heavy industry. So very sad and very tragic position as far as Russia is concerned. So the Red Terror, whatever the intentions of the Bolsheviks, there is no doubt that violence and terror became widespread. Red Army was used to enforce the procurement of grain from peasants who were thought to have surpluses. During 1918, the Cheka suppressed 245 peasant uprisings, 99 in the first 7 months of 1919. This was a term of abuse applied to landowners, priests, businessmen, employers, army officers, and professional people. They were all labeled enemies of the people. You can understand, okay, enemies of the people, and as a part of government campaigns of class war. Because government do not want so many classes, government do not want a kind of a hierarchy, government do not want on paper that there are people who are having a lot of wealth and there are people who are not having any wealth. So the redistribution is done in a merciless way, and that is what is called red terror. So you can understand the Eastern Front between 1914 to 1918, how Russia was doing in 1917, and how in 1918 there is going to be a further Austro-German advance. So please do have a look. Germany, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, Greece, Turkey, Constantinople, Sweden, Petrograd, and you can see Pakov also. Very important. And again, you can always write in your mains examination, and also you can draw how Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was so important for USSR. When we see international and global level, Russia became the first country to establish a communist state, and communist parties were formed in many other countries after this. Russian Revolution paved the way for rise of communism. It was an influential political belief system around the world. Very important. It also set the stage for rise of Soviet Union as a world power that will go ahead with the United States during the Cold War. Bolsheviks encouraged colonial people to follow their experiment. Many non-Russians from outside USSR participated in the Conference of the People of the East, and Bolshevik founded Comintern, an international union of pro-Bolshevik social parties. Socialism became popular by the time of outbreak of the Second World War. By the end of the 20th century, the international reputation of USSR as a socialist country had declined, though it recognized that socialist ideas still enjoyed respect among its people. But in each country, the idea of socialism was rethought in a number of ways. You can think about India also, which never went on to apply socialism completely because we adopted socialistic pattern of society, but we are not going to be a complete socialistic country. And secondly, we are actually a mixed model. When we see about significance, then the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, it opened a fresh chapter in human civilization. Its importance is no less than the French Revolution of 1789. Its impact is also not less than American and French Revolution, because the influence of the Bolshevik Revolution was global. It encouraged the people who were suffering, who were downtrodden, to fight for freedom. Russian Revolution brought about a far-reaching social, economic, and political change in Russia. It led to the birth of USSR, that is Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. For the first time, the world socialist state was created. Production and distribution were controlled by state. Private ownership by means of production and private profit making were no more allowed, and land was taken away from the landlords and redistributed among the peasants. And then we are not saying that it was completely a transparent process. There will be a lot of corruption, there will be a lot of coercion, and there will be a lot of ignominy suffered by a lot of people. But then, like China, it will not be coming out very soon. So the affairs of the Soviet Union, one can say, were keenly observed by the rest of the world. It was the first implementation of the philosophy preached by Karl Marx. Bolshevik Revolution made possible the dream of dictatorship of proletariat in reality. Writings and speeches of Marx and Lenin were translated into various languages of the world, and under the forceful impact of Marxism, Leninism, communist parties were founded in different parts of the world. Though the commentary in the Russian Revolution helped to strengthen the anti-colonial nationalist movement in different countries of Asia, we can say India will also be learning from it, and in India also there will be Communist Party and Communist, and there will be people like S.A. Dange, Muzaffar Ali, and so forth, and they will be greatly inspired by Bolshevik message. This great upheaval left a permanent imprint on the future course of world history. In a long-term sense, one can say, indirectly, Russian Revolution contributed to the growth of fascism in Europe and the beginning of Cold War between Russia and the United States in the post-Second World War. But we are not saying that Russia alone was responsible for the rise of fascism, or for that matter, Nazism. When we say the civil war in Russia between 1918 to 1921, because when the Lenin and Bolsheviks are coming into power, it is very important to understand that England, France, Czechoslovakia, they sent expeditionary forces to Russia. They wanted it to crush any kind of, you can say, revolutionary ideas. Invasion will be coming at a time when the country was engaged in civil war between Red Army, that is Bolshevik, and the White Army, that is counter-revolutionary forces. Bolsheviks, led by Lenin and Trotsky, they went on to start project of national consolidation. They were facing challenge from internally, that is landlord businessmen, and externally they were suffering, or they were fighting against the White Army, receiving support from various foreign governments, like the way we see today also, like what happened in China when Chiang Kai-shek was supported, or like what happened in you can say Cambodia, or like what happened in different other parts of the world, like North Korea and South Korea also. So we can say White Army receiving support from United States, England, France, Germany, and Italy, but then again they will not be successful. So they proposed external peace with the Central Powers and with Germany by the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and to control the counter-revolution, Lenin is going to follow a ruthless policy of repression. They will be setting up tribunals called Cheka, which supervise thousands of executions, similar to French Revolution. You can remember in 1790s there was going to be again radicals, Girondists, and so forth. That is why there will be reign of terror like the way in France. Here also you can say. But why Western powers were interested in the counter-revolution thing? Because they feared the Russian Revolution example, if it is going to be replicated by the middle class, by the working class, by the peasants in the rest of the world, then there is going to be breaking down of their own model. In fact, I would like to say middle class is not much supporting, but it is the working class and the peasants. That is why world revolution, the term which is being used for the model USSR is creating, it is going to threaten Western powers. And they wanted this must not happen. So one can say that even Germany was also greatly influenced by all these developments, and there will be large number of consequences. So Bolsheviks went on to win because counter revolutions were not united. Military leaders of counter-revolutionaries, they were also supporting Bolsheviks some way. New government enjoyed full support of the peasant. Allied intervention was inadequate and subjugated to, certain kind of limitations because Russia was a huge country. That is why the forces withdrew in 1919. The Red Army proved to be much more organized fighting force under Trotsky. So the Bolsheviks defeated White Army in the Russian Civil War, and which took place, as I said, from 1918 to 1921. And this war, actually, one can say, led to the rise of Bolsheviks' power in a very, very big way. So the coalition of anti-Bolshevik forces, they will be finished. The war was brutal, bloody, and it will be killing many other people. So Red Army led by communists, White Army made up of diverse groups, and anti-Bolsheviks including monarchists, capitalists, and supporters of the democratic socialism. Red Army going to establish Soviet Union. Soviet Union is going to have large number of territories like Georgia, Belarus, and even Ukraine. They all will be part of USSR. And this is going to pave the rise for communism as a political belief and Soviet Union as a world power. This war is going to, impact mainly southern and eastern Russia, and there were some skirmish in the north. White Army received military aid from Great Britain, France, US, and Japan, but the Bolsheviks were able to defeat them with internal support and power. So you can say very, very important because we have discussed the whole structure and the chronology, how Russian Revolution is happening and what are the changes which are there between 1918 to 1921, and at the same time, we can say in India, Gandhiji will be taking a center stage. So one can say that in the mains examination in general studies and also in other subjects, you have to draw a small map or a kind of a Venn diagram or a kind of a, you can say, a pictographic representation, and you will be able to showcase that actually how the developments are taking place. Now let's see Communist International, that is the third international or Comintern. 1919, 2 years after forming the Soviet government in Russia, Lenin established headquarters of the third Communist International in Moscow. We can think of Emin Roy also, who also got inspired from international, you can say, communist ideas. So the Communist International or Comintern is the third because two other international socialist organization of workers had already been set up. The first workers international organization, or you can say first international workers conference, was set up in 1864 by Friedrich Engels, who was collaborator of Karl Marx, very important for the prelims. Second Socialist International was formed in 1889, headquarters in Brussels, Belgium, and it was dissolved in May 1943. The third international was composed of representatives of communist parties in 50 countries. So what you have to understand is that communist ideas are not very consolidated, not very single monolithic idea. They were taking place in different parts of the world in different ways because communism is going to come up through socialist ideas as reflected by Karl Marx ideas. Theoretically, Russian Communist Party was one of the only 50th communist parties which were set up. Russian communists play a dominant role because now they have power, they have resources, and that is why we can say they are called as Third International from the day it was organized. This was partially because of the fact that Third International had its headquarters in Moscow, and Russian Communist Party was the only one which had supported and which had been able to come to power, and it was successful in establishing and maintaining political control of a country. This country, that is Russia, a great power, that is why it is called USSR. And the objective was to replace the world capitalist economy by a world system of communism through force and violence if needed. That is why you can say whole world, I mean to say the developed world, or I mean to say the Western world, or I mean to say UK, US, and other powers will be bothered. After 1924, Stalin emerged as a strong leader, sidelining Trotsky. He rejected Comintern plan of instant revolution as he saw the importance of foreign capital and knowledge for Russian industrialization. He started economic regeneration of the country, introduced 5-year plans in 1928, focusing upon nationalism, increase in production, rapid industrialization, and his goal was to attempt economic self-sufficiency and elimination of capitalism in the long run. So huge factories, blast furnaces, they were all set up during this time, technical schools, industrial training centers, and expert advice were sought from abroad. Second 5-year plan 1933 to 1938, it went on to see a great industrial progress, and Soviet Union turned into one of the leading industrialized countries of the world during the third plan period between 1938 to 1943. So we have discussed two very important things: League of Nations and the Russian Revolution. It was an economic explosion, you have to understand that. And then causes of Russian Revolution, analyze these causes, and then why second revolution was significant more than in one way. What were the causes for the success of Bolshevik Revolution? Secondly, role of Lenin, we have already discussed in detail. Father of socialism, organizer of revolution, founder of new Russian society. You have to examine this statement, how Lenin achieved an abrupt transition from a monarchical autocratic to a socialist state. Similarly, the bold knight Lenin, having rescued the fair maiden of Russian Revolution from the evil sorcerer Kerensky, everyone lived happily after. So, okay, do you really agree with that? That is what you have to see. Account for overthrow of Tsarist regime, we have already discussed that. And the impact of the French Revolution was initially confined to Europe, but that of Russian Revolution was global. Already I have discussed this in a critical way. You have to write. How did Stalin build on Lenin's legacy of Bolshevik Revolution and introduce new elements of totalitarianism to transform USSR as a superpower? We have already discussed that, but you can always Google a little more. And the impact of French Revolution was confined to Europe, but that of Russian Revolution global. This is second time asked by the examination, and it was a single revolution which developed two phases that you have to elucidate, and you have to examine the dangers of Bolshevism in dominating not only history of the years immediately following Russian Revolution, but the entire history of world since that date. So you have to first clear your foundation, and you have to make your own notes. You have to revise them, go through the video lecture again, write these answers. We will discuss in our personal sessions how you have done it. If you are doing it with lot of integrity, lot of honesty, and most importantly a pleasant, unwavering attitude leading to a solid, successful temperament, nobody can stop your success with Ansar Kari. Thank you very much, and see you in the next session.